Ooh, super duper high. Hey, you guys, it is I, Becca Lori Hector, here with Being Becca Live. I did not check my camera before I turned on the computer. There we go. That's a little better. Anyway, welcome to Being Becca Live. That is my weekly live stream where I sit here and kind of chat about all of the challenges, current and otherwise, of being an autistic adult alive right now. And we kind of all sit here and chat about it, topic by topic, and whatever, is up. And I do have a topic for today, of course. My topics have been coming to me sort of as I'm going through my days. As you guys know, if you've been following, hey, Burnett, if you've been following sort of what I've been doing on here and all of that stuff, you have seen that I'm in sort of a transition in terms of employment, and I've got some other stuff going on, and I'm always on a learning curve about those kinds of things. And so that's what I think these days I've sort of ended up talking about. And we've had some really good conversations about it. And I think we're going to have a good conversation about this one too. So let's get into it. So I wrote myself a little note. Hey, CV. Good morning, Nancy. And we're just kind of going to go with it. So this is how, now remember I used to have like a little calendar. That's really terrible. Okay, so remember I used to have like I would make notes in my calendar. This is the new method. So we have little scrap papers at work where we, write little notes if we're on the phone and that kind of thing. And I had this thought while I was just standing at the computer at work, and I wanted to talk to you guys about it a little bit because I think it's something that we all kind of process through in our own way, and yet we've probably never really talked about it specifically. Hey, Karen. So let's talk about it. So I wrote myself that little note, and it just says, Being Becca Live, why and how you identify is important, but it's also flexible, ? Right? And I wrote Becca the vet tech versus Becca the autistic, right? So let's think about that for a second. What I mean by identify, I don't mean identify in terms of how the outside world sees you. Fuck that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how you identify inside, right? And how that translates to kind of how you identify on the outside. So like, that's what I mean. Yes, there's outside to it eventually, but I'm not talking about that masking version of identification. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something different. The way you see yourself in the scheme of all of these things, right? The way you identify as part of the bigger plan. Hey, Ross, how are you? Thanks for joining us. Hey, Bernard. And so, yay, exciting that we're going to talk about this. So that I want to talk about it in a few different ways. So the reason that this all came to mind, right, is because people have been, ever since we bought the small business in town and kind of since I moved to the vet's office, everybody's kind of been asking, how are we doing over there? How is this going on? Blah, blah, blah. And a lot of the people that I am neighbors with and see in real life here in Colorado, right, don't really know about all of the advocacy work that I do. They know like the basics, right? It's like, oh yeah, she's an autism and neurodiversity consultant. What that translates into for them, I don't know. And so they don't really see me that way. They don't really know me that way in town. And what's been really interesting and what I've really enjoyed is since Antonio and I have started to really participate kind of in our town's infrastructure, I have really kind of settled into this zone of being Antonio's wife. And I know that sounds really strange and it feels weird beyond coming out of my mouth, right? But for a really long time in our relationship, pretty much most of it, right, he's been Becca's husband or Becca's boyfriend or Becca's fiance, right? And I've always been Becca Lori Hector, autism advocate, consultant, blah, 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 right? And that's sort of been the status of our relationship. But it has changed and morphed into this thing where everybody knows who Antonio is. Oh, that's the Sammy guy. That's the blah, 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 the orange truck, all of these things, right? And that's his wife. And sometimes and that's his wife, Becca, if they remember my name. And I'm really enjoying that. I've been enjoying that since we've sort of moved up here, sort of being in that place of, you don't really need to know that much about me, which I know sounds strange, but as someone who grew up in New York City where anonymity is the name of the game, right? And somebody who has always been sort of a person who'd rather disappear into the walls than sort of stand out, having that role of being Becca Lori Hector advocate consultant has been a learning experience for me. And I have really enjoyed the relief and the pressure of just being Antonio's wife. So new development in all of that. And, now that I'm back at work, right, I've been thinking a lot about what does that mean for me in terms of how do I answer the question, what do you do, right? Here in America, I can vouch for you. That's like the first or second or third question strangers will ask you in a like get to know you scenario, right? Is, maybe they'll ask your name, maybe they'll ask how you know the person that connects you to, and then it's usually, well, what do you do for a living, right? What do you do? And so having an answer for that question is something that has always caused me trauma since I've had this really fucked up and, I don't even know what to call it, roller coastery work history, right? It was always really tense when that question would come up. Would I have an answer? Would I currently be working? Would I be doing something new and have to explain the transition? Would I, all of those social stressors that come with that question being asked. And so that was always the case. And so for the last 10 years, the easiest way to answer people about what it is that I do is to say that I'm an autism and neurodiversity consultant. They ask more, I talk about the support groups that I do, and I talk about the course, and I talk about advocating, and I talk about training and all of those other things, presentations, blah, blah, blah. But if they don't ask, that's kind of how I leave it, right? Recently, since I've returned to work, I realized that in my head, that identification has changed. That in my head, I now think of myself primarily as a vet tech and secondarily as an advocate. And that was a really intentional choice. If you guys remember, I was really needing and wanting to step back from the autism community a bunch because I wasn't feeling like I was making any headway and the passion had depleted and all of those things I tell you to look for when it's time to move on to another job. And all of that was happening. And so I realized that very quickly into this whole transition, my brain has already stopped thinking about myself as an autism and neurodiversity consultant and more as a vet tech. I think I'm spending more of my time and spoons doing that job. And so I guess that's why my brain made that transition, right? But how quickly it just decided on me. It wasn't even a conscious thought about how I was going to think about myself. So I wanted to talk to you about that because I had two moments of awareness with it, right? First, the way that we think about ourselves inside and the way that we identify inside really needs to match the way that we feel on the way that we, I don't want to say appear, that's not what I mean. The way we present, maybe that's better, in the outside, right? When we don't have those things match, that's when we feel like we're masking. That's when we feel that inauthenticity, when we feel that the extra work to it, right? Okay, so I've been thinking about all that and how quickly this all happened. And so I started to think about how what we need to do as humans is to think about the two versions of identification, sort of the way that people identify with us or not with us on the outside, right? And the way that we think about ourselves inside and the effort to make those match or not match, right? Whatever that scenario may be for you, right? And so what it means for me to flip identities in this way is it means that I'm very consciously and even subconsciously at this point, right, making that choice that autism stuff has to take a backseat, that it's not the foot that I want to lead with anymore, that it's not the things that I want to be doing anymore, right? And so naturally, if I'm in alignment and I'm making choices in alignment and I'm doing things toward that goal, right, of course, that the thoughts inside my brain will roll along with that, right? Unless I want to change them. And what I realized is when I went through this process so naturally and I sort of kind of gave into it a little bit more than trying to have control over it, which was old habit, that identification piece happened really naturally, okay? And so what I want to say now is two things. Am I going to feel weird if somebody calls me an autism advocate now because I don't identify that way so much anymore? Or is it going to feel more like, oh yeah, I do that too, which is the response that I'd like to feel on it. The other thing that I've been thinking about is how important it is for us to understand that our identity has to be flexible. Okay. And this is the piece that I was leading up to that I really want to talk about, which is what I think is a natural autistic struggle to kind of fight the change of having your identity change, right? That inflexibility. We're like, no, this is how I identify and that's the way it is, and period, right? But if we're evolving as people, right? If we're doing the growth work and the learning and all the personal development stuff that we do, right? That shouldn't be the case. If we're evolving, our identities should evolve too, right? So whomever kind of implanted this idea in our heads that our identity is somehow permanent, it has some kind of cement to it, it's some kind of real, permanent marker to it, I guess, right? Is wrong, is what I'm thinking, right? And that how we identify is not only something that needs to be flexible and is flexible, right? But, how you identify in here is really the part that has to be decided first. And is really the part that matters, right? Because everyone else will catch up, right? That's the evolution process. And so understanding in here, that we need to be flexible with the way that we think about ourselves, with the way that we identify, with our strengths and our weaknesses, because those two change, right? All of that stuff is always in motion and moving and changing. And we're hopefully, if we are dedicated people, and if you're watching this, I know you do the work. So if you're doing the work, right, we should start seeing those benefits. And so that's going to come with evolutionary processes like having identity changes, like thinking about the way you want to really align with what is the identity that's in line, right? That's in alignment with those choices towards the goal that you're setting, right? And to me, saying, I'm Becca the vet tech now instead of Becca the advocate means I've made this choice to put that foot first. And I'm not fighting the transition. I'm not fighting the flexibility in identity that I need to have. Can I grieve my old identity? I think so. I think we're allowed that. And I think I won't truly grieve it because I'm not really letting it go. I'm just kind of putting that identity on the back seat for a little bit, right? Because I think primarily this is sort of what I want to have be my purpose. This is what I want to use my spoons towards. And if I was walking around in the world busting my ass the way I bust my ass at the animal hospital and being a vet tech and not giving myself credit like taking the identity on, right? But instead walking around, still touting around that I'm an autism advocate and consultant, when that's really only now 25% of what I do, right? We have that in authenticity again, right? And so if we don't adapt our inner identities to the changes that we're making on the outside and the goals that we're chasing and the thought patterns that we're trying to fix, the alignment that we're trying to create, right? We're already out of alignment. Right. And so I had this moment about it where I was like, wow, here's something that I think in general in the world, right? We have this idea somehow that it should be permanent, that it's this permanent thing, right? And I think that idea of things being permanent, right, and permanent identities is where we have so much strife and why we have so much strife over things like folks being trans, folks being multigendered, folks being, of diverse sexualities, right? That becomes an issue when you say, no, people were born and we've identified them in permanent marker as boy, girl, heterosexual, right? All of those things, right? And so when we think about our self-identity, and those are components of your self-identity, of course, right? My bisexuality is something that is part of my identity, and it's definitely been a part of my life for as long as I can remember, right? But that's not the foot that I lead with. At this point in my brain, the foot that I'm leading with most is as Antonio's wife, because I'm enjoying it. And then the one I'm leading with right behind that these days is the realization from yesterday that I'm really leading with Becca the vet tech now, right behind that. And so it's not that the bisexuality or the autism advocacy or any of those parts of my identity have disappeared or they were untrue. They're just not my lead right now. They're not where I want my energy going. That's not where I kind of want to be with all of it. Does that make sense? Oh, I hope I'm making sense. It feels like one of those days where I could just be talking out of my ass and I'm trying to put words together so that you know what I'm thinking about, but I'm not making sense. So if that's happening, I apologize. But this was sort of this idea. And I know when I talk in the course and we go through a lot of things, something I remind you about a lot is to remain that little bit flexible, right? Like the buildings in Japan, a little bit flexible, right? And the reason we do that is because we don't want everything crumbling, right? And this is the same idea, right? If your identity, your inner identity is shifting or changing or moving, right? That doesn't mean that we have to destroy the entire building, right? We can remain flexible with that change. We don't have to kind of be very black and white, very light switch about those changes. That's not necessary. And a lot of our inner changes and inner identity that we go through, many folks never experience at all. It's a very personal journey, right? And so we need to remember that too, that we're remaining flexible in there for ourselves, not for anybody else. Right? It's about allowing the space for growth, allowing the space for evolution, allowing the doors to be open, allowing all of that stuff to happen instead of trying to over control everything and thereby limiting stuff and opportunities. So that's what I was really thinking about, right? Was how there are these versions of identity, right? And so like where there's the ones that are put upon you by the outside world, right? And how the world sees you. And then there are these identities that we carry inside, which is the way we feel about ourselves. And if we're not acknowledging that A, sometimes that's different, and B, that we may not like the current identity, or we may like it, but we may hide it, whatever it is, right? That it's part of this flexible journey, and it just is your identity for right now, right? Because you can't know where you're headed, and you can't know how long you'll be identifying in this way, right? Because all of that stuff, it has movement. All of that stuff is about evolution. All of that stuff is time passing, right? That we can't control. We can only control, as I consistently tell you guys, our responses to those things and the way that we get up, our resilience. So yeah, that's what I have to share with you guys today. I'm not sure that I made too much sense. I will try to think it through, but I'm really looking forward to your comments. I'm looking forward to seeing what it is that you think about the video, how you may or may not have thought about your inner identity versus your outer identity versus your realistic identity, right? And how maybe being inflexible with that identity has sort of caused you, I don't know, multi-jams and stuff. Who knows? But I think it's something we need to explore. And I'm curious if you guys experience it as a conscious thing, an unconscious thing, and how many of those inner identities do you carry with you? I know I can say for sure I carry at least 4 of them, right? And that's an interesting thing. And I think we go through a shuffle of which foot we lead with. And sometimes we ditch a foot entirely and grow a new one, so to speak, right? But it's really been an interesting journey to think about that inside. Like when I wake up in the morning, I'm not necessarily always thinking about how many views I've had, or did people see this post, or did I get comments on that thing, or whatever. But instead now I'm waking up going, oh, you know, that client I saw yesterday, I wonder what happened this morning with blah, 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 right? And that's an important thing to realize, that that's where my brain is. That's where my spoons are. That's where my passion is. And when I'm kind of in a position where I have advocacy stuff to do, I'm not as excited anymore, right? And so it was important for me to sort of recognize that this new identity was around. I just wanted to kind of know that. So yeah, Bill said I cannot speak right now. The fluidity of being adaptable is essential to continuing evolution. STL teaches to blur the boundaries and escape the box. Yes, exactly, Bill, right? Because this would be the trap. The trap would be, no, I can't do that vet tech job, or I can't identify with that as my first identity because no, I'm Becca the advocate. That's what I've been for the last 10 years, right? What a mistake that would be. What a a falsity you'd be living, but what a mistake, right? So yeah, thank you, Bill. Thank you for getting it. And thank you for, I don't know, retaining the teaching of SCL, right? Because it's a thought pattern. And whenever we run into our challenges, we want to be using those same damn tools, the same skill sets to process every single one of these challenges. And that's what I try to tell you in the course, is that I'm not giving you a skill set to deal with one thing. I'm giving you a skill set for the rest of your life to deal with all of the parts and components of who you are. So anyway, but I'm getting off my soapbox. The course is up right now for recording if you are interested in changing your thinking pattern. And I'll be doing it live in September. So I'm not going to talk about that right now. I'm glad you guys are identifying a little bit with this topic. I want you to think about it a little bit. I have more thinking to do about it, obviously. But it's a good one. And I think we need to do some work on that. So yeah, I throw that out to you guys. Do some thinking about your identity today. How do you identify truly on the inside? How do you think about yourself? And is that true to the way you present yourself out in the world? And do you like it that way? I don't know. Think about it. And think about maybe too times in the past where you've maybe fought that desire or never recognized it. I mean, there are times when we don't realize we've trapped ourselves. So now's the time to just think on that topic and think about where those traps may lie. Anyways, that's it for Being Becca Live today. Thank you guys so much for taking the spoons and time to join me today on Being Becca Live. I will be back next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time for the next Being Becca Live. And if you'd like to join me again this week, you can join me for Growing Gratitude on Sunday at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, where I talk about the things that I'm grateful for in my life from the week, no matter how shitty my week has been. So we'll be doing that. So thank you guys for joining me. I appreciate it. Please send me your comments wherever you're watching this video and what you think. Your thumbs up and thumbs down. Let me and YouTube know that what I'm doing is interesting to you. And your shares as well mean a ton to me. If you'd like to reach me personally and privately, you can email me directly at info@BeccaLory.com, or you can head to my website and use the contact page that goes directly to me. It is BeccaLory.com. Everything is below in the description. I will see you guys next Wednesday for Being Becca Live, and I will see you on Sunday if you join me for Growing Gratitude. Have a good one, you guys. Get out there and seek some joys, create some joys, share some joy, all the joys, and I will see you on Sunday. Bye.